Welcome to the Amazing Leader series. My name is Karin Volo, and I'm the Chief Joy Bringer and CEO of Evolution, where our purpose is bringing joy to the workplace. And I'm always so excited to have new guests on this show. And today I've got a wonderful gentleman who's down running a company in the Netherlands, also lives in Switzerland, very European. His name is Tom van der Lubbe, and he is the first among equals CEO. We'll get into a little bit of that, and co-founder of a company called Visie, which actually means vision. And it's a financial services company that's based in the Netherlands that offers customized mortgage solutions for highly educated customers. His personal focus is to change the world of finance and does this through his people and developing a culture where people can thrive. He actually uses a lot of principles with Holacracy, which we'll get into a bit as well. And this company has actually been recognized as a great place to work for 5 years, and 2 years, the last couple of years, running in the #1 position there. And their purpose in the context of Holacracy is basically beyond employment, finding your passion. So he started his professional career as a consultant and has worked internationally before founding or co-founding Visie in 2010. And Tom enjoys supporting many ventures, is an advisor and a board member for startups, corporates, entrepreneurial and cultural initiatives. And he really believes that we should leave the world in a better shape than when we were born. So he actually has discovered that life can be very short when he had cancer at 20, which is an experience that has shaped his life and outlook ever since. He wants to spend his time on things that matter and believes in why for both individuals and organizations. And the why is the motivational engine that gives fulfillment to what we do. So you can see why I've invited him onto our show. So welcome, Tom. I'm so glad to have you here with us.
Thank you, Karin.
So let's go into some of these questions. People may not know who you are, so just tell us a little bit about yourself and your journey and kind of what got you to where you are today.
Yeah, I think you already made an excellent introduction. My name is Tom. I'm 52. My background is perhaps a little bit exotic, although I'm working in this financial sector since 95. I haven't studied economics for a main subject. I wanted to become a diplomat. So I'm a historian, actually, but I also studied politics and international law and this kind of stuff. I studied in the Netherlands. Then afterwards, I studied in Paris, Sciences Po. That was the time when I thought I wanted to become a diplomat. And then after the wall came down from 91, I studied in Berlin. And I stayed there, and actually I live in Switzerland, but I'm mainly active in the Netherlands with the mortgage company you already mentioned. And 1 or 2 sentences to my private life. I'm 52 and have 2 very small children, so I'm a very happy old father. Perhaps that keeps me young. And as you already said, but we'll come after that or dive into that my biography shaped my life, which may be interesting for people because it has influenced my way of thinking about being active as an entrepreneur.
So let's go ahead and dive into what you're referring to a little bit here, because I have a feeling this may be one of those things that's had a huge impact in your life and kind of set the way that you are today. So go ahead and just share your personal story there.
Yeah, what is interesting is that the topic, let's say, if you come from the business side, people may be familiar with Stephen Covey, I think, with the end in mind. And that's the old theme of memento mori, that you go to the end of your life and say, okay, what will be left over when I'm not there anymore? And the older you get, the more this is kind of confrontation coming up. So it's always very interesting to talk to people who are much older. But sometimes, and that was the case in my personal life, that I was confronted with that when I was 20, as you already said in your introduction. So I had a chance of surviving cancer of 20%. So I'm the lucky one who survived, and that changes your whole attitude towards life. But it's something, let's say, I'm not unique in that. So what you see is that a lot of people who are very purpose oriented, I find out again and again that they most of the time there is something in their biography and it's not done to talk about this a lot. So I didn't talk about, for instance, having survived cancer for a long time. I didn't have it on my LinkedIn profile and this kind of stuff. And then the more I talked about a purpose, then in the end of those interviews, always people asked, where does this thrive come from? And then at a certain point I said, I'll just go to the real explanation. That's why I think we should contribute to a better world. And I think that's just something I share with a lot of people who have also have experienced this kind of things in their lives.
You know, that's such a good point, because I do find that as well. People who are here to serve have actually had some sort of massive challenge in their life. And I think we're getting to the point now where people are looking for very authentic leaders. And in order to share kind of what motivates or drives you, you need to get into a little bit of, this is what's happened to me, and this is why I am the way that I am. And it actually helps people to connect on a much deeper level. So thank you for sharing that. And, it's obviously turned out well. You're here at 52
lucky
and thriving. So that's great. So what would you say what's the thing that drives you the most? What motivates you the most?
It has a lot of different aspects, but what I would say that in the end, and that's also something I think which is really embedded in let's say being human beings, is that there is this great mechanism that, let's say, helping others gives you more fulfillment than being egoistic. So just to put it in, let's say, entrepreneurial context or business context, it gives you much more fulfillment to build something and to facilitate or to see others grow than become rich. So it must be, you can trade a lot of you can do a lot of trading in financial companies and sharing, or let's say buying and selling stocks, etc. But the real fulfillment comes if you help others, and if you see about fulfillment, and you speak about with teachers or people working in hospitals, especially in this COVID crisis, you see this again, that even if things are really very, very difficult, and there's a lot of stress, that still people in hospitals say there is a kind of atmosphere, or there is a kind of commitment also to each other in especially in times of crisis, gives you much more fulfillment. So I think that's in the end the motivation, that people will say, okay, it was nice working together in this company, or it was nice together working in this team, or it was nice to having the possibility of finding my own let's say fulfillment, or developing my own talents.
Yeah, I find that's pretty common in a lot of leaders, where they just want to, help and develop others, which is obviously traits of a good leader. So that doesn't surprise me. And I know we're kind of having this European mentality of don't brag about yourself, but I'm going to ask you a question here, and I want you to just share openly. But what would you say has, been the key to your success with your company? And let's just preface this by, we talked a little bit before we got started here that you've had one of the best years in your company, and it's, 2020, at the end of 2020 right now. So what would you say is the key to thriving in especially such difficult times?
I think it's putting people first, and it has more different layers. So I'm just only one of the co-founders. So we are four, and actually somebody also joined us. So we're five more or less in this shareholder group of people. But it's about putting people first. So if this is the starting point, and then everything in the end works out, because let's say everybody knows exactly that there is a safe environment, and people can just go and do their work, and then people are from let's say a natural way of behaving. People want to do things together. So people are not lonely riders. They they only can survive in communities. So we wouldn't survive if we would be alone. So in the end, we need others, and we want to work together with other people, and we want to build together on something. And I think that's the core. And if you then take all the stress out, so you have to take away the demotivation, and then the intrinsic motivation will be there automatically.
Yeah, that's very interesting, because that's something we see very common as well, as putting people first and creating an environment where people feel safe is really vital for the health of any sort of organization. So I know we've talked before when we first initially connected about your views on holacracy and how you kind of are playing with that with your company. So for those that might not know what it is, maybe you can give us a little overview of that, and then tell us what you've been doing with that inside of your company.
Yeah, just to put it in a very simple way, it's about decentralized decision making. So, and you can, if people are really interested in this topic, people can really dive into podcasts and videos, etc. But in the end, it's about decentralized decision making, and that means that people are, let's say, really able and willing to decide for themselves how to solve their stuff every day. And they don't need somebody in a vertical way to tell them how to do their work, because they're all grown up. So that's the way it works. So it's just creating this environment. And then if you, for instance, talk about our company, about advising clients, we have excellent advisors, and we don't have to micromanage them. We don't have to dive into their client cases and tell them how they have to serve their clients. They know perfectly well. And we're just one company. But if you talk about Bob Chapman, or if you talk about Southwest Airlines, it's again and again, everything is exactly the same, because it's always this perspective of, when I would be the client, when I would be served, what would I like as a kind of service? How would I like to be treated? And everybody want to be treated in a correct, friendly way. And everybody knows this, because if you go into a restaurant and you're not treated well, you're not coming back. So and that in an honest way, which also doesn't mean that it's not possible to make mistakes. But if there is this sincere and honest way of treating each other, then it's not a problem at all.
It's so interesting. I also love Bob Chapman. I've interviewed him here with Barry Weimiller and Southwest Airlines. So it's scalable, and it's something that is definitely, works in large organizations, smaller organizations. And unfortunately, the first time I'd heard of holacracy is when Tony Hsieh from Zappos was playing around with that as well. Yeah. And I think we see a shift right now in leaders and leadership and thinking in terms of what to do with organizations. And some feel they have a little bit more freedom to test these things out and experiment with them.
But perhaps when I may add one thing, because holacracy comes from sociocracy, and sociocracy is a Dutch invention, and it was invented after the First World War, and it had a human approach. So it was the goal was not to let's say maximize the output or to create a better performance. No, it was to integrate, let's say, the normal people working and doing the work, and it was also a kind of pacifist reaction to integrate everybody working in companies, because there was this fear of communism. So if you would Google sociocracy, that's where it comes from. And this whole idea that, for instance, teams are called circles is something which you also find in anthropology. So the circle gives you a kind of equality. So everything. So Bob Chapman would say everybody matters, but if you put everybody in a circle, it's not a kind of hierarchy is not the right word, but it's a kind of, if people are sitting in a circle and you have this talking stick, it's a kind of respectful way of dealing with each other. That's where it originally comes from.
I did not know that, and leave it to the Dutch to give us the credit for that, right?
Yeah.
So good for you. Thank you for that, educational tidbit there. I find it fascinating, because I think what we're seeing right now in terms of the shift is that we leadership and the way companies have been managed is very industrial based, and we're shifting now, and we have, for the most part, highly, intelligent people in the majority of the jobs, and they should have the ability to make decisions and be a leader, step into self-leadership, even if they're not a manager per se. So I definitely see that happening, and I think our progressive leaders are kind of embracing that. So you're giving a little bit of a different angle, which I think is great as well. How important would you say culture and trust would be to, building your business?
It's a starting point. So it's always the core. So, but you have this theory of, do you think that, let's say, the glass is half full or half empty, or do you think in a positive way or in a negative way? It is the theory from the 50s. So, and especially if it's a more complicated way of working together. I mean, it's not about, let's say, working on the fields and picking the grapes or something like that, but it's an intellectual way of working together and being innovative, or in finding solutions for certain types of problems. People really have to interact, and then you have to trust each other. So that's always a starting point. But it's what I always find interesting is that we discuss a lot on about these principles, and I always ask the question, why should business be totally different from the rest of society? So if you talk about families, then there, or if you talk about, let's say, children, there's also this very positive way of helping your children. So if a child starts to walk, you don't tell a child that if it's not able to walk immediately, that the child should just stop trying to walk. No, you will just help, and then you will say, okay, no, you're really doing fine. And that's also what I like about Bob Chapman. So this idea of the bus, which is just driving circles and just taking everybody in, and just everybody also giving the time to find the right point or the right moment to add on the bus, which is a different concept of Jim Collins, who says put the right people on the bus, and there are right and wrong people, because that's what it says. You have right people and wrong people, and there are no wrong people. So and people have a very social behavior towards each other. So it's especially what you see also in the COVID crisis, that if something happens like that, you had a lot of papers in apartment buildings where just people wrote their phone numbers and just wrote down, if somebody needs help, just call me, I will go to the supermarket. It's not, and it was not mentioned, you can only call me when you, I don't know, are this neighbor or that neighbor, and I'm not going into the supermarket for this other neighbor. So this instinctive reaction is to help each other. If somebody wants to cross the street, an elderly person, people will go there and help this elderly person. People just, they would walk by and say, I don't care, it's not my grandmother, I'm not going to help this lady.
Yeah, this is one thing that I think as human beings, we're for the vast majority of people are generally pretty good, and have this ability to have compassion and see if someone is in need, that you automatically will try and do something to help. So I think it's great that we can create environments where people feel safe and comfortable in the workplace as well. You had mentioned a little bit in terms of this has been one of the best years for your company during 2020 and the COVID pandemic and all of that. Why would you say it's been such a good year? And then I know you've done a lot of extra things to help support your team. So let's get into some of those examples that you can share of what you've done a little bit differently to make your organization feel really comfortable during this time.
I think I don't know if we did it in a very different way, but there are examples also, let's say in your podcast series, if you talk about Bob Chapman, or if you talk about, for instance, Southwest Airlines, it always start with putting your people first. And we didn't have to change this hierarchy in times of crisis. So we said there's only one goal, and that's we should stay together. We're not going to lay off anybody, and the first goal is everybody should stay healthy. That's it, full stop. And then there's a second part that, let's say, sure, there's a financial, let's say, part of the whole story. And then we said, okay, it's the obligation of the shareholders to put money into the company if this would be needed. So it's not let's fire as fast as possible so that we don't have to take our responsibility as shareholders. No, it's exactly the other way around. If shareholders have money besides the company, they should feel the obligation to put it into the company again. But it's something which is very common for small and medium-sized enterprises. So I think the majority behaves like that. And then we did something that we made a kind of, you call it a kind of traffic lights system. We just took all our people and we said, okay, what's their private situation? For instance, if they have a partner who works in hospital and they have children at home, then we just say, you don't have to work. In the end, they worked, because then they tried to support in the evenings their colleagues, etc. And then you had a category of people who can work 50% because they have perhaps children. I was in this middle category, and I have a partner who also works 100%. And then you have to split the day. They say, okay, I'll take half of the day, and you will do the other half. And then the third category were people who were, let's say, single or don't have children at home and just could work 100%. And that also gives you a kind of psychological safety, that you just know that in the team there's a kind of solidarity, and you try to solve and to do the work together. And that's the starting point. And then in the end, it worked out very well. But there is this feeling that your colleagues will care for you when you are at that time in a more difficult situation.
Yeah, that's great that you have that kind of a connection. And I find, especially during this crisis time that we've all kind of experienced, is that the companies that have had already a really strong foundation culturally, they seem to be thriving. And the leaders that are committed to the people and putting the people first, majority have not laid off people. It depends a little bit on the industry, of course, but majority have tried to do the best to keep the people on board and really work together. So in general, because you're in, kind of a leadership type role, what would you say from your perspective are the biggest challenges that CEOs are facing? And, how can they best manage with what they're dealing with?
Yeah, it's always very difficult because it really depends on, let's say, what sector, and also if, for instance, if you're stock listed. So I have a huge respect for the CEO of Southwest Airlines. And there is a great video where he just explains that they're not going to lay off people. And then you talk about the airline industry. So that's probably the most difficult industry at all. So let's say if I am asked, what should people do? I always, let's say, I find it pretty difficult, because let's say we were in a very lucky situation. We didn't have any problems in our industry. We could work online, etc. We had the highest revenue, etc. But I think that especially one should stay to their core beliefs. It's always about values. And if you on the one hand say you have values and then you don't walk the talk, then you're ruining your company. And there's a lot of research done on that. I also wrote an article about it, which you can just find because it's in English. That layoffs harm your company. So companies who stay or put solidarity at the core in those crises, they have a higher shareholder value afterwards. But that's in a way very normal or understandable. It's the same about, let's say, friendships. So if you have a friend who is in need, and you will not, and somebody will call you and say, I really have a huge problem, can you help me? And you say, no, I'm not going to help you because I don't care, then you will harm this friendship, or you will lose this friendship. So why would this very normal way of behaving be totally different in a company? So if somebody is in a weaker position and working in a company, and then is laid off or has the fear of being laid off all the time, how can you expect somebody to be very committed to the company? And there is this fear. So if somebody is not safe or doesn't feel safe, there's a lot of research done on that you lose an enormous amount of productivity, which is very normal. Because if you open your laptop every morning and you don't know, and you search for the first email about the next round of layoffs, then you're losing probably between 50 or 80% of your productivity. And what happened in our company was, because people felt safe, people were enormously productive, because there is this kind of moral obligation which people feel to give something back, because they are thankful, but also to each other, because they have this collective idea: I am privileged to work in this great company together with my colleagues. So it's not about, let's say, me or our co-founders. No, we're 50 people and we build this culture together. So it's about I am part of something which I'm proud of. And I think that's the core of, and it doesn't matter what it is. It's about a great sports team, or it's about helping if you're a lot of friends or in a family, etc. And in the end, it's always about caring for people who are in a weaker position.
Yeah, it's interesting to see. I think we're going to have a lot of lessons to reflect back on after this time, to see, who really thrived and why. And I think you're hitting the nail on the head there with, it's just basic common sense. It's caring about the people. And if they feel they are cared for and safe, they're going to thrive, and they feel this moral commitment to be productive. So it's great that you can see that. As we start to wrap up, what would be one piece of advice or insights that you could give to leaders and managers that would maybe help them to make a difference in the work that they're doing?
Yeah, I would advise, but also between brackets again, I would really read more philosophy and ethics instead of management books, because this whole basic principles, they are as old as society. And for instance, we have, just to put a very practical example, we have only one rule, the so-called golden rule: treat other people like you want to be treated yourself. And then you find out, if you dive into this kind of questions, and you call it in a practical way walk the talk, that this is the basic principle in all the religions. So it's also not that you would say, it's only in Western Europe, or it's only in the West, or it's only, no, it's the same everywhere. So it's always about solidarity. It's always about treating others like you wanted to be treated yourself. But to create a kind of understanding that what we are doing in business often is the exception and not the rule. That's something which is much easier to understand if we would read more philosophy or dive into history, etc. Because our media is so much focused on, let's say, Jeff Bezos and becoming rich and unicorns and Elon Musk, etc., that we don't have a clear picture of let's say what's the core of our civilization and our way of dealing with each other as human beings.
Yeah, that's beautifully said. And I think we need to sometimes reevaluate how we define success. I mean, for me, everybody has their own definition of success, but we get kind of pummeled from different sources that this is the way to success, and you're only successful if you have done these things. And, in the end, at the end of your life, the only thing you can take with you is, the love you've shared, the relationships you've had, and you can't take any of the other stuff. So I think it's important to kind of keep that in perspective. I think you're a great example of, an amazing leader who's making a difference out there, and you're walking the talk. If anyone's interested in learning more about you, where would you recommend to let people connect with you?
LinkedIn is a great platform. So always welcome everybody. We also answer everything. So also people who want to write articles or do research at universities, and so we have enough time for that. So you're always welcome. That's also part of our mission to share, to make this world a little bit a better place. And if people are interested in certain topics, they can just Google the company name Visio or my name, because all the stuff we do is shared openly. So that's always a kind of, if we speak at conferences, we always say, okay, yeah, we're willing to do pro bono, so we don't get money for this, but we would like to have it on the web afterwards, so that it is perhaps also inspiration for other people to just continue what they are doing, because sometimes it's a kind of moral support, because sometimes you feel alone and you think you are the exception. And I always want to shout out, no, you're not the exception, you're the rule, and just try to read less articles about stock listed companies.
Great. Fabulous. I appreciate that. I think by sharing what you're doing and being able to get it out to as many people, it is going to inspire others to think a little bit differently and maybe try and play with some of these things that you've shared with us today. So thank you so much for your time, Tom. Really appreciate it, and look forward to seeing and following your career and what you're doing and making a difference there.
Karin, thank you very much for having me and sharing the story of Visio.